Hello everyone, in this section we are going to learn most commonly used types in Python. First we'll learn how to check type of a variable, and then we'll go into details for number, boolean, list, string, and dictionary type. Let's learn how to check variable types in Python. When I ask you the type of a paper, you would tell me easily whether it's a stripe paper or a drawing paper. Similarly, the type method in Python tells you the type of the given variable. When you pass number 10 into type method, it will tell it's an integer. If you pass a string which says hello in quotes, it will tell you it's a string. You can also pass the variable itself to the type method to see what kind of or what type of information this variable holds. If you define an age variable which stores number 30, and when you pass this variable to the type method, it will tell it's an integer. Let's continue with a quick exercise just to understand what this type method does actually. So let's start with the first one. So it's asking us to assign type 10 into a variable. Let's say my type equals to type 10. And it's telling us print this variable. And let's run this. So as you can see, when we print my type, it's what we are assigning here is type of 10, which is an integer. So it will assign this into this variable. And once we print that, it will just print its type integer. So the next one is telling this time use type hello and print this. And let's run this one. So as you can see, for this part, it prints its type integer. And for this part, since it's a string, when we send it to the type method, it will just say type string and store it in this one. So once we print it, as you can see here, it's telling us type is string. You can also do something like this and pass the variable here, and same here. And when you run this, you'll see the exact same thing. Now let's move to the number type. We already have an idea about this type from the previous section. Now we'll just dive a bit more into it. There are two widely used number types in Python, int and float. Int is short for integer. It can be -200, 0, or 55. No decimal points, no quotes, just numbers. Float is for floating point numbers. It contains one or more decimals. It can be -10.5, or 0.1, or 5.5. Let's check some examples. In the first one, we are assigning 5 into our variable. 5 is an integer. In the second one, we are assigning 5.0, and in the third one, we are assigning 5.5 into our variable. 5.0 and 5.5 are floats. Even if 5.0 looks like an integer, since you use point, it's not just 5, it's 5.0, Python will store it as float. And please pause the video here and solve these questions by yourself before moving on to the solution. So for the first one, let's define a variable and assign an integer value into it. And then let's define a type variable. Let's call it my type, and assign it to the type of the previous variable, and then print it. And let's see. So as you can see, like in the previous section, since we are assigning an integer, and then we are assigning its type into this variable, and once we print it, it's telling us it's an integer. Now let's move to the next one. So we'll define another variable. Let's call it my float, and it's asking us to assign a float value into this variable. So something is float as long as it has a decimal point. So let's use 3.14, and then my other type equals to type of this variable, and then let's print it. And if we run this, as you can see, this is the first question and this is the second one. So since we are assigning 3.14, and since you have a decimal point here, it will be a float type. And once we get the type of this variable here and assign it into this one, it will be a float, and once we print it, it will just say it's type float. Like numbers or strings, Boolean is just another type. It's a simpler one though. It can be either true or false. This might look useless at this point, but you'll see how useful they are in the following sections. Alright, it's time to learn our first relatively more complex type, which is list. Let's say you are writing your to-dos on paper. If you have a single to-do, you can write it on a single paper. What about when you have a bunch of to-dos on a deck of papers? Things like send the email, buy milk, call mom. You can try writing one to-do per paper and maybe give a name for each. Similarly, you can store these in separate variables in Python. To-do1 equals to send the email, to-do2 equals to buy milk, and to-do3 equals to call mom. One issue with this approach is that it's not easy to add, remove, or access our to-dos. Let's see how we can achieve the same by using a list. On the left side, we have the variable name for our list, and on the right side, we have the value of our list. We use brackets to tell where this list starts and ends. Then put one or multiple values within brackets. Then separate each value by a comma. To make it easier to read, we can also split each value into separate line. Values doesn't have to be a string. It can be a list of integers, or it can be a list of Booleans, or any other type. If you think lists like a notebook or a book, how would you tell me which item you want from the book? You can say page 15 or page 2, right? Same thing applies here. You can tell what is the first, second, and third to do. Instead of page number, lists have indexes. First item has index 0, second item has index 1, and the third item has index 2, and so on. By using indexes, you can access the values stored in a list. Since our list variable name is to-dos, access is also around that variable. And we use brackets to tell which index we want from this list. To-dos 0 in brackets will return the first item, to-dos 1 in brackets will return the second item, and so on. You'll understand how useful this syntax is once we learn for and while loops. To summarize, lists are like books. Each item is a page, and book is starting from page 0 instead of 1. Let's remember how we were changing the values for variables. Existing variable name on the left, and the new value on the right, and an equal sign in between. When we have a list, how can we change one of the items? It's actually the same process. Instead of just putting the variable name on the left, you also specify the index you want to change in brackets. Let's change the first to-do in our list to clean your room. Since our list name is to-dos, we will write to-dos, 0 in brackets, equals to clean your room. Since the item at index 0 is the first item, it will replace the value of the first item with what we provided. Before, first item in the to-do list was send the email, but after we changed the value at the index 0, it became clean your room. Adding an item into a list is like adding a page into a notebook. We use append method to add new items. This will add the given string into our to-dos list. as you can see here, given to do appended into our list. What if you don't need a page in your notebook anymore and you want to tear it out? To remove an item from a list, you can use remove method. This will remove the given item from the to-dos list. As you can see here, given to do is removed from our list. Okay, let's move to the coding exercise for the list section, and please solve it by yourself before moving on to the solution. So the first question is telling us define a string list with 3 to-dos inside. So let's call our variable name as to-do list, and let's put each item into a separate line just to make it easier to read. So let's say send the email is our first to do. We are putting a comma and moving on to the next item. Let's say buy milk, and we are moving to the last one, call mom. Cool, we defined the list here, and now it's telling us print the first and second to do. So the only thing you should remember here is the first item is at index 0, not 1. So we'll say to-do list, and in brackets we are going to give 0. And to print the first, so this will print the first one. To print the second to-do, we'll do something similar. We'll give 1. So remember, the index 1 is mapping to the second item in our to-do list. Okay, so far let's see how it works. Cool, the first item is send an email, and the second one is buy milk. So let's continue on the question. So now it's telling us add a new to-do into the list and print the list to make sure item is added. So if you remember, the method to add something new into our list is using append method. So let's add a new to-do here. Let's say repair the car. And now we'll print the whole to-do list instead of individual items. Alright, so this is that print method we have in line 10 here. So it printed everything, send the email, buy milk, call mom, repair the car. As you can see, this list now has 4 items, and the thing we appended is appended to the end basically. So far so good. So then it's telling us change the second to do to something else and print the list to make sure item is changed. So we'll do to-do list. So to change the second item, we need to say to-do list 1 in brackets, which is the second item in the list, and we say equals to, let's say, clean your room. And then let's print the to-do list again. So here, this was our initial list before we changed the second item. And here we have buy milk. And after we change the second item, now it's clean your room. Okay, the last one is telling remove the first to do from the list and print the list to make sure item is removed. So we were using remove method to remove something, and we should give the item we want to remove. So first item is send the email. So we are giving this. Basically we are saying remove this item from this list, and let's print it again. And let's run this. So as you can see, in our list, we don't have send the email anymore. So in this one, we have it here, but after we call remove, it's not part of the list anymore. Let's move to the second question. So this time we'll define an integer list and we'll put just 4 numbers inside. So let's say my numbers equals to 2, 5, 1, and 10. And then we need to print the first number. So for that we are writing our the name of our list, and to print the first number we need to give 0 in brackets, which is the first item in the list. And if we run this, we should see 2. Yeah. And then it's telling us add a new number into the list and print the list to make sure item is added. So you can remember from the previous question or the section, we use append method to add something new. So instead of string, this time we are using integers. So we'll say, let's say use 8, and let's print the list. And when we run this, so this was our initial list. Since we appended 8, as you can see, it's basically we see 8 here at the end. And then the next one is remove the last number from the list and print the list to make sure item is removed. So the last item is 8, and to remove that we'll say my numbers, and for removal we use remove method, and we are giving which item we want to remove. In this case, since it's last item, we are giving 8, and we are printing it again. And when we run this, so we appended 8 here, and then we removed it. So when we print, there is no 8 in the list anymore. So the last part of the second question is asking change the first number to something else and print the list again. So the first number was my numbers, 0 in brackets, and we'll put 100 here. And when we print my numbers and run our code, so this was the list before we changed the first item. As you can see, we have 2 here. Once we change the first item with 100 at line 10 here, so the first item is 100 now. So let's move to the type string. Strings are anything within quotes. It can use double quotes or single quotes. When computer is reading a line in our code, it will stop evaluating when it sees an opening quote. It will go till it finds the closing quote and creates a string with everything in between quotes, without evaluating what's written inside. Let's see some examples to understand it better. While print123 prints 123 to the screen, adding quotes around it will just create a string and won't print anything to the screen. While everything after a hash sign will not be evaluated since it's a command, adding quotes around it will just define a string. So on the left side we have 35 without quotes, which is an integer, but on the right side we have 35 within quotes, which will define a string. So don't forget to close the quotes you opened. And don't forget, anything within quotes is a string basically. So do you remember physical dictionaries from the old days? They have words in bolds on the left and its description or translation on the right. They are kind of key-value pairs, keys being the word in bold and value being the description or translation. Python calls this type as dictionary for a reason. It's because it's the exact same thing, bunch of key-value pairs. Instead of words and translations, let's have a dictionary to store phone numbers. If we simply use variables, we can do something like defining a variable for each phone number, like phone mic equals to whatever, phone jack equals to some other phone number in quotes and so on. But same thing we discussed while learning lists is that this is not a good approach for this use case. Python's dictionary type can be a great phone book for us. Just to make it easier to read, I split each item into a separate line, but you can keep everything in the same line as well. We put the variable name on the left and the dictionary value on the right. We use braces to tell Python where our dictionary starts and ends. Then we put each key value pair or name phone number pair in our dictionary and separate them, separate each item with a comma. We can also use other types for the value. If we want to store age of each person, we can use integers as values. Or if we need yes, no or true, false kind of information, we can use Boolean type as values as well. We can also use list as the value if we need to store list of items for each key. We can even store another dictionary as the value in our main dictionary. When we say phone_book, it gives us the dictionary itself. How can we access the individual items in our dictionary, phone numbers in this case? As we mentioned earlier, these are just key value pairs, and to access the value, we need to use the key. We can use the variable name of our dictionary and the key we want to access in brackets. Please note we were just using numbers in brackets to access items in the list type. But in dictionary we are using strings, so we need to put quotes around the key. If you had a physical phone book, how would you change a phone number for a given person? First, you find them by their name in the phone book, and then change the value corresponding to that name. Same applies here. If you want to update the phone number for Mike, you write which variable or which part of the dictionary you want to update on the left and its new value on the right. First we put the name of our dictionary variable, which is phone_book, then the key we want to change in brackets, Mike in quotes in this case. Then we put an equal sign, and then we give the new phone number. After computer executes this, it will update Mike's phone number in the dictionary to whatever value we provided. Now let's see how to add a new phone number into our phone book dictionary. Adding items is the same with changing existing values. Name of the dictionary, then key we want to add in brackets, and then an equal sign, and on the right side we put the value of the new item we are adding. After this, a new entry will be created in our dictionary with the key value pair we just provided. Here we have our new entry Ryan and his new phone number. Now let's see how to remove an entry from our phone book. We use pop method and pass the key we want to remove. This will remove Jack from our dictionary. After calling pop method, there is no entry with key Jack anymore. So now let's move to the coding exercises for dictionary type. And please pause the video here and solve it by yourself before moving on to the solution. Okay, the first question is telling us to define a dictionary and store street addresses of Zoe and Lee. So let's define address book and let's use curly braces and let's put each value in separate line to read it easier. So we can use Zoe or we can use capital letter here, but please note if you use it like this, when you are accessing this item, you also need to put capital letter for the first one. So let's use lowercase just to make it easier. And address, let's say Main Street 123. We are putting a comma and we are moving on to the next value here or next item. So for Lee, let's use 333 Georgia Street. Alright, so we created our address book and we put 2 entries inside. And the next thing is printing this address book. Yeah, when we run, as you can see, Zoe has this address and Lee has this address. So let's move to the next one. It's saying add a new address into the dictionary for Leah. So to add a new entry, we were using brackets and then give whatever key we want to add. In this case, it's Leah. And we are giving a new address here for the first like initial address for Leah. And let's use 22 Richmond Road. And once we do this, basically we are adding this new item into our dictionary. So if we print this and run it, you can see initially we had Zoe and Lee. Now we also have Leah in our dictionary and her new address. And then now we need to change Lee's address to something else and print it again. So changing an entry is exactly the same with adding a brand new entry. So we'll again use the same syntax here, address book, and we'll give Lee this time. And then we'll give its new value, which will overwrite the existing value. Now let's say 55 Georgia Street. And let's print the address book. So here Lee had 333 Georgia Street. Oops, there's a typo here. Okay, initially it was 333 Georgia Street, and for Lee now we have 55 Georgia Street, as we change its value here. And the last part was removing the Zoe's address from our dictionary. So we are writing our dictionary name, and to remove something we were using pop method, and we were giving the key we want to remove. So in this case we want to remove Zoe's address, so we'll give Zoe in quotes, which is the key here, and this will just remove it from our dictionary. And once we print the address book again, so we have Lee here, Leah here, but Zoe is not part of our dictionary anymore, as we removed it by using pop method. That's all for this section. We covered most commonly used types in Python. If you have any comments or questions, just use the comment section below. And thanks for watching.